To make a prairie, it takes a clover and one bee. One clover and a bee, and reverie. The reverie alone will do if the bees are few.
Welcome to Bees and Reverie Radio, the podcast where we talk about pollinator gardens, native plants, bees, butterflies, and other topics related to biodiversity, including what we can do in our own backyards. And sometimes we will report on current environmental news and anything biodiversity related that we should all be aware of and do together to protect bees, butterflies, and habitat here in the U.S. I'm Emily Wayland.
And I'm LaDawna Howard. This week we are continuing sharing information and discussing monarch butterflies. In part one, we talked about the monarch butterfly's decline and the decade-long journey from initial petition to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to list the butterfly as threatened.
I was able to attend one of the service's public virtual meetings on the proposal and listen to some public verbal comments, which I found very interesting.
And Emily, we've also dropped a couple of news updates about how the Endangered Species Act might be affected by President Trump's, quote, energy emergency executive order. You've dropped a short here on the Western monarch population status. And as of the time of this recording, we are still waiting on the numbers for the Eastern monarch butterfly population. Is that right?
Correct. Hopefully we should have that later this month. That's what Monarch Watch is saying, late February. So we'll get there when we get there.
Okay. I'm really excited about today's episode because Emily and I have spoken with someone who advocates for monarch butterflies about their feelings on this Endangered Species Act proposal for the monarchs.
Right. So we sat down with Rich Lund of MrLundScience on YouTube, whose Raising Monarch series not only helped me better understand and follow the science of monarch conservation, but also responsible methods of rearing and the real benefit of doing so, which is an education and awareness. The real conservation comes in habitat restoration, planting milkweed. I know I'm not the only citizen scientist that has watched Rich Lund's videos, but he has been putting the series out for at least a decade. He has also been following the Endangered Species Act journey from the beginning, so I thought it would be a good idea to chat with him now that we finally reached this moment in time where the proposal is actually happening.
And I'm so glad that you thought it would be a good idea to talk to him. I had never seen his channel before, and this was a really fun interview. Emily, I think the three of us had a good conversation. I think it's informative, but it was also just a lot of fun. So for anyone who
I agree.
cares, so for anyone who cares about monarch butterflies and biodiversity, I think you'll enjoy the interview. Here it is.
So, welcome to Bees and Reverie Radio, Rich Lund. Can you tell us a bit about yourself? Now, I found you on YouTube, and I love your channel because you teach people how to rear monarch butterflies responsibly and ethically, and what the real benefits are to rearing them. And I notice you also follow the science very closely and appear to have a very nuanced perspective on monarch conservation. Can you talk a bit about yourself, your channel, what you do there, and why you decided to make videos on the monarch butterflies?
First, also just thank you for having me. Feel honored whenever anybody voluntarily chooses to hear my opinion. So it's very much appreciated. And those were some strong words of compliment. You mentioned some things that I definitely try to hit the mark with as best I can with the YouTube channel. Before that happens, so others know, I'm a Michigan public high school science teacher, 18 years in the game. 15 of those years I spent teaching AP chemistry. And now currently I'm in my first year of calculus-based AP Physics C, and teaching that in the Metro Detroit area. And it's been pretty exciting. And along that route too, it was with the 15 years of teaching AP Chemistry, I was also coaching Science Olympiad. And for those who don't know Science Olympiad, there's 23 events, and just every field of science is represented, and some events are cycled in and out. And entomology was coming up. So back in the days of like 2012, 2013, I was kind of preparing myself to be able to coach it better. And that's when on the YouTube channel where I was putting like chemistry demonstrations and just other demonstrations I wanted my students to be able to see, I was making some videos to try to inspire my Science Olympiad about entomology. I learned about the plight of the monarch butterfly. And I was also seeing what kind of instructional videos were out there to try to help me understand how I could get maybe my Science Olympiad team hooked on this idea and just also like make them excited for a new event coming up. So all of that kind of put together, I made some instructional videos for the fact that like the ones that I was looking at, they were good, had some good information, but nothing was really comprehensive. And I needed something for my classroom students to be able to watch and see and be interested in. So I made some instructional videos, but did it not from, hey, you're a kid in my classroom, but instead something where maybe anybody could benefit from. And that's kind of where the videos came to be. And since then, with as much public interest as there has been, definitely a lot of questions along the way, and I've learned a lot along the way too. A lot of follow-up episodes have occurred.
Yeah, that's great. It's always very important to make sure because science is always ever evolving, it's never definitive. And that is the case for monarch conservation as well. So you've done some YouTube videos about the monarch, should it become endangered? And that was before everything happened with the current proposal. I believe you did a video on the initial 2014 proposal. So before this proposal was published here in December of 2024, did you have an opinion on if the monarch should be listed or not?
I certainly did, and something that I try to do in the Raising Monarchs videos is to, if I'm offering my own opinion, try to explain like this is my opinion, and I'm not always saying like my opinion is the opinion to have or that it's the best one, but explain what my opinion is, what reasoning got me to that opinion. Because I think there are some choices where how you choose to engage with nature is still completely up to you. And there's maybe more than one correct and ethical way to do it. And then with that in mind, when it comes to like listing an animal on the endangered species list, as a science teacher first and primary, the word species was always giving me a hang up because truly the species as defined scientifically, there's populations of the monarch butterfly species all over the world. Maybe not in every single area, but certainly like the populations that are in Australia are not the same ones we're talking about with what's happening in North America. So that was always sticking in my craw, and like just I was never going to get over that. Like really, it's the populations, but I don't think that there needs to be an Endangered Species Act and an Endangered Populations Act either. So to put aside my science teacher semantics, the problem better being understood is like you have populations that are in decline, populations that are essentially matching the idea of a species being either threatened or endangered. I was definitely a fan of perhaps this should be looked at and some well thought out ethical choices should be made that can benefit and help protect the monarch butterflies. But I also knew there can be correct ways to do it, there can be incorrect ways to do it. And both are always really involving good intentions. The Endangered Species Act has many good success stories, good track record on many species and helping them out, getting them to stable population status. But there's also times where we've tried to help things and it can sometimes have a detractment to what our efforts actually are trying to do.
Sure, that makes sense. So we are actually currently in a public comment period for this proposal. It lasts until March 12th. Any citizen can offer their comments. So if you were to submit anything during the public comment period, what would you suggest or offer feedback on? Would you want anything in the proposal as it is listed to be changed?
I, when it came out and getting to read it through and getting to see what, if it lined up with what some of the summaries are out there, I'm a pretty happy guy with it. I know that if when it came to like my public comments, I would hope if I were to add any, I wouldn't want them to have like more influence or weight than other comments. If it's a governmental kind of thing, I wouldn't want mine to have more importance. So I haven't really voiced anything on what I would want people to be saying on any video. I think that's up for their own personal household needs to want to cover. But I know that when I look at what the proposal has in it, I know that I got a lot of what I wanted.
Sure.
I'm overall a fan of it. In general, I like it. It depends on how things get rolled out, and it looks good on paper. It looks good in theory. Is that how it's going to really be in practice? We have yet to see. That's always true too of just anything that's been engineered. This is what it intends to do. How does it really work in practice? But from what I can tell, and trusting that the words it has in it are going to be interpreted the correct way, it has a focus on not just monarchs, but milkweed. And that was important to me. It has the idea seemingly that milkweed that's on your property is going to be still, however you want to treat it is up to you. And that I think is a big win, because if somebody has milkweed on their property and receives protection status, that can sometimes be the reason it's a detractment, where people don't want the government's hands on their property. So if milkweed's just naturally growing on your yard, you were going to let it grow just fine. But now if it becomes protected, then you'd want to almost get rid of it before anybody's looking to see. So that way you don't have the government having its hands on your property.
Sure.
So
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, like I think the saying might be like dig, ditch, and forget. Something like that, where you see it coming down the road, this is going to take an action. And so you get it actually off of your property. So that way you don't have to worry about what laws might be attached to this.
Right.
And definitely easily something that was involved with the proposal is that there can still be responsible rearing by individuals. That was big time something that would be a concern for me if it wasn't on there, because I had braced for 10, I had braced for 0. I was hoping maybe something like 50 would be there, and instead it's 250 per household. And if really I was going to change anything, it might almost be, and I don't know how popular this will be to some people listening, but maybe 250 is too large of a number. And that's from a guy who has raised, 300 plus on a season before. But I know that from doing that kind of a number and being a teacher who has, I don't want to say the summer's off, we do a lot of work, but having a definite flexible schedule in the summer, I know how much work 200 plus can be, let alone 300 plus. So like a 250 mark, if you have a household where you've got a lot of people in your household being interested in it, I'm sure that can easily be done correct. If you are finding the time to easily, devote the time, I know it can be done responsibly. I've done it responsibly. I just hope that people are still conservative in their numbers. They don't hear 250 and think, all right, let's go for that. And instead try to focus on, quality always before quantity. Make sure you can rear, if you're going to choose to do that, make sure you can rear 2 responsibly before you jump into, let's try 100, if that makes sense.
That absolutely makes sense. And that was something I was thinking about too. Like when I became more like flexible with the number after I learned kind of where they got that from. It's from a permit process that they do with the USDA in order to take insects across state lines. So that was kind of the go-to number. But you are absolutely right in that people need to focus on what does your schedule look like? How many can you reasonably take care of? You can't possibly try to take in every single life that you find on milkweed wherever you are. So you do have, and I don't know if that number is different person to person. So like I was very surprised to see this high of a number, because like you said, I was expecting 10 because that is what the 2014 petition suggested.
Yeah. And if you have, like, again, I'm not predicting this, but I just see as a, trying to troubleshoot things, here is a chance where this could be interpreted wrong, where maybe somebody was just interested in helping before might get into this in the summer, and they were having a goal of maybe rearing 10 or 20. And then they see, the monarch's been listed as endangered or threatened in this case. And they're saying the number of 250. That means we need to rear 250 monarchs each summer to help this. And that's not at all the case. That could be something misconstrued by the populace if it's not well communicated out.
I think that's a really good point that I hadn't even thought of as messaging with this. I think personally, I'm going to try to focus on that a lot with it. Because I don't know if the government will do that. They're going to publish their press releases and just be like, okay, here it is, or whatever they end up doing. And it does leave a lot up to interpretation. So I think you're right to be cautious about that I'll just mention too quick, when I attended the meetings for this and there was a public comment section where people were voicing their opinions, there was a butterfly farmer from Florida who was very concerned about the number of 250 per household and suggested that the service come to her butterfly farms to see how she does her practices so they can give some good suggestions of how to do it properly. So I hope that they take her up on that.
And I think that would be a great effort to communicate out the responsible ways to do it. I didn't have the intention of the parts 1 through 5 of Raising Monarchs to become the popular videos that they did. My intention truly was make it for classroom use and probably use it anytime entomology was cycling through. Instead, there was a lot of interest with it. And in looking at what influence that can have, what I tried to do to steer that ship from that point on was recognizing there's a populace that it can be intimidating sometimes to try to sift through a scientific paper. It can be intimidating also to try to sift through laws that are passed. And do we all have really the time for that? There needs to be a voice of communicating, here's the proper way to do it. And if certain organizations don't have the time to make such videos, and I understand that, there's other ways that the word's got to get out. And I don't think that there's a lack of ways we want to get the word out. The more communication on the efforts, the better. Just making sure that it's the good information, that it's correct, that it's verified, been backed by evidence, and it's not built on assumptions.
Now, what do you think about allowing monarchs for sale under this proposal?
It depends on how the word sale, really gets defined. And again, can be defined in the law, but also how is it really enforced? A law is only as good as it is enforceable. So when it comes to the sale of animals, I think that definitely there's a spectrum of where people are going to agree on what level of animal rights should exist.
Right.
I myself, wherever I am on that spectrum, I have a ball python who I bought from a pet store. I can't claim that she's a domesticated reptile because I don't know that, reptiles have that processing power to really say we've ever domesticated them.
Right.
Meanwhile, I have a rescue Chihuahua pug, and she's definitely domesticated. And I think that was a pretty ethical choice. I hope people would deem it that way for, her to be rescued. So wherever I am in there, obviously I'm willing to purchase an animal, but I've never been a fan of the purchase of wild animals. Okay, maybe you purchase some wild ladybugs because you want to eat some aphids on your crops. Okay, cool.
No.
I knew that was going to happen.
That's one of my special interests is talking to people about why not to buy ladybugs, but I'll save that for another episode.
That was probably the worst example to bring up for that.
Actually, though, it's actually a good example because it's a big. Almost every garden center has them available. But we'll talk about that in a future episode.
Well, just comparatively speaking with it, it's why you have to look at why people purchase these insects. Like people think they're purchasing the ladybugs to do a good thing. And I'm sure in some cases they're purchasing monarchs because they think they're doing a good thing or they're educating their child. So I think there are some similarities you can draw from the ladybug thing there.
Very much so. I'd like to give an offshoot as to why that might have been the first one to come to mind. And I am going to now look forward to following up on this now to find out, because I wish to know more on this. But it came to mind because there was a senior prank done once where there was a lot of ladybugs that we found inside a copy machine due to the ladybug squishings that were coming out on our copies. And upon some forensic evidence of finding the sales bag and Amazon shipment of it in the nearby trash by this copier, it became apparent that some seniors had purchased some ladybugs normally intended for eating aphids, but instead they released them on our copier.
Oh.
I
I love
did try to
your
ethically save and release all that I could. So I don't know how that fits in with this part either. Like, should I have squished them? I don't know, but plenty were getting squished by the cockroach. That's why that sprang to mind first. But
I can see
That's
this.
funny.
I love the storytelling here and your use of the phrase forensic investigation. Where did these ladybugs come from? But that is one of the things with, as you put it, sort of wild animals and I've heard Emily say, Emily, you said I think in the last episode, monarchs aren't livestock, they're
Yeah,
wildlife.
that's what I said.
Yeah. So it is a different thing when you're talking about wildlife as opposed to, as you said, domesticated animals.
fully agreed. And I think like, save for I think part two, I named a monarch in that video Les after Les Claypool for the Primus song used in that one. Beyond that, I don't name the monarchs that I take in and rear because that's really something I would reserve for a pet. Instead, this is a
Right.
wild animal. The only name it might get involves some letters and numbers if it has a tag, and that's about as close as we get.
Sure. Yeah, I've done it before just for fun, but it's clearly marketing purposes to because people are attracted to that kind of thing. So when I've made my informational TikTok videos, we've named them things just to kind of make it more fun. But yeah, it's the same thing. They're not pets. They don't care about us. They don't want us to be around them.
Yeah, and
So,
certainly there's another case where like my opinion is not necessarily that's how I do it. Is if others want to name their monarchs, that's fun. Why not? Um,
hmm.
but back to like the idea of the sale of them, then in exploring that, when you say, can we sell a monarch? Well, if you want to get a home rearing kit for monarchs, there's already like some details there of, well, do we need monarchs to teach the same thing that you could teach with painted ladies that aren't in the same kind of plight? And
Right.
that's a question to explore. But still, for educators, I would always hope, knowing what kind of thrill, knowing that there are educators out there in classrooms across America, across North America, where you have the chance to rear monarchs and get a real experience, a very much connection with that animal that you're rearing in the classroom. I would hope certainly you could supply teachers with that, with access to that, and the students, and just the wealth of that experience is just it's invaluable. It's definitely worth it. I would hope that such kind of sale from companies would be ethical in such pricing. I when I was saying I braced for 10, it's like I could see easily, hey, maybe 10 per household, but then also fill out the right paperwork and verify you're an educator, go to 50 or whatever it would be, maybe a classroom need that's realistic. When it comes to the sale though of monarchs for, let's just go into the realm of jewelry. If it's,
Mm,
we've got a monarch wing, and this was a monarch that got hit by a car. And so it's already dead, and I wanted to make some cool earrings. I made it as a Mother's Day gift. That's something that's very heartfelt and intentionally great, but also wearing actual wings as jewelry, this is promoting the idea of the body itself is something to be marketed as a part of the jewelry trade. And that can only encourage and promote the idea of people potentially seeing this 250 and saying, all right, that means I got 500 pairs of wings each year that I can do legally and have that be part of my jewelry endeavor. It could be wherever you have a desire to help something, you're going to see a market and people are going to potentially try to, help out that market for the good intentions. Some might try to exploit that market. And it's something to always be investigative and aware of.
I didn't know that people made jewelry out of parts of monarchs, but
oh
now
yeah.
that you say it, I think maybe I have seen it now that you said it, but somehow just this conversation sort of brought it home for me. Uh, and I had heard from Emily about people releasing monarchs, at weddings or funerals or that type of thing. Is there Emily, you might know the answer to this, and I'm trying to remember, does this current recommendation by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service limit that? Does it say, so it has the 250 number that people can raise 250 even for commercial purposes, but does it limit their use or is it just beyond 250, you have to get a permit, but you can do what you want with them.
It's pretty much the latter, and that's kind of where I have we've talked about this. We talked about this in the previous episode that, we recorded. Especially hearing the comments from so many farmers during that meeting.
Yeah.
It didn't really specify use, and that is kind of where I have problems with it. I have no problem if you want to raise monarchs that are going to be released into like a conservatory for a butterfly exhibit. And they will spend out their natural lives there. But I think there is a tricky area with the educational kits, because a lot of times you have to make sure that there's going to be proper hygiene and sanitary practices with that. Make sure you're not going to have so many that you spread OE. And I know there's always been and I'm not a crafter of anything to do with monarch wings, so I don't know these things, but I do know that there are farms that will just supply an Etsy seller. You can order a bunch of wings from a farm somewhere. Like that
Oh,
is
wow.
something that you can do. And it's something that I think it's a very fine line. And I think once you add that endangered label to it, you are adding an incentive to it. So I would want to limit that for jewelry, because I think that makes it a coveted item for people. Like, oh, I have this precious endangered butterfly wing. There's already illegal practices out in the Far East of capturing butterflies for this purpose, for collectors. So I think there needs to be some more stipulations under the sales section. Like I said, I don't know what that would look like, but I get nervous about, releasing more OE at weddings and funerals. Shipping them in the mail is also kind of already rough on them. And the whole jewelry thing is something I struggle with as well. So
Got it.
I hope I answered that correctly, but
So
that's
it
kind of where
sounds
I'm thinking of.
so in terms of and either of you can correct me if this is wrong. So in terms of the current proposal, then for people who feel like, I guess I do,
Right.
it makes progress because it lists the species as threatened. It will protect certain critical habitats, though
Yes.
Mr. Lund, as you said, it doesn't mean milkweed will be uh, protected everywhere, like in people's yards, but it will protect critical habitats. And it does make progress because it limits the number of monarchs that people can raise and use for commercial purposes as well to 250. Beyond that, there's a
Mhm.
permitting process. So it sounds like if
Right.
someone were to comment on this, I know from my work on through the regulatory process that when there is a public comment period like this, it's good for people to comment on public comment periods like this if they're generally in favor of of the proposal, even if it's not perfect.
Right.
So someone saying, I support I support the proposal for monarch butterflies to be considered threatened. There should be more protections for monarchs. Or people could say, we need more milkweed in this country. I'm glad to see, critical milkweed habitats be protected or whatever. And then it sounds like if someone has a strong opinion, Emily, like possibly you do or I do about
Yeah.
how monarchs are being used, we could, if we choose, add that to our personal comments in this comment period. But if someone is a little more agnostic on the monarch rearing and raising and or the commercial use of them, which is separate, somebody could
hmm
somebody could still support the overall proposal without necessarily weighing in on that detail.
Right. And that's kind of why I really support the permitting process, because if I don't know what the permit will ask, like, do they have to state what their purpose of farming is? And would they get turned down if they were farming it for jewelry? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think there is some good that comes from it, but it did seem a little loose just right off the bat.
Okay,
And
thank you.
to touch on like wedding releases, if I certainly hope I'm not about to bum somebody out who's very ethically doing it, and that's their livelihood. That's how they're paying their bills. But
Hmm.
we got to recognize too that with all ethical intentions, mistakes still happen. I know from my own efforts of attempting to do it each season, I've had my own outbreaks at times, and never attached to that was anything but the data and just the emotional defeat of occurring. Of what could I have
Right.
done to have prevented that? But when you have a due date, when you have a customer, you've got money on the line and food is on the table because of it, and you have an outbreak, or you have a situation maybe where, yeah, I tested them, they're OE positive. Perhaps the right thing to do in this case is to not release the 100 for this order. And I can't really call the customer and tell them, hey, only 20 tested out to be OE free. So that's what you're getting. And then sometimes too, the wedding shipments are in chrysalis form. So there's not really an OE testing happening. In those
Right.
cases, if you've attached the profit and the food on the table to it, we're going to be putting our family's food on the table before that of the monarch. And so it's something where I wouldn't want to encourage it, knowing that it can be done ethically and responsibly. I just know that that'd be really tough to do.
Yes, especially since most of the farms are in the southern area of the United States where OE is more of a problem.
Very much. And to touch also on why I'm also like I'm very happy that they let you do what you want to with your milkweed in your yard and under this proposal, is that I know that like that would also be some firm ground to where a lot of confusion could happen.
Yes.
Because if we did have, I've had my own shoots of milkweed sprout up where, hey, that's not actually where I have some territory reserved for milkweed. That's where I normally mow. I'm still going to always
Hmm.
check that shoot for monarch eggs. That tends to be more tender leaves. It tends to be where females lay their eggs. So I'm always going to be checking those. And the questions just popped up in my head throughout the stir of proposals coming down the road. What would happen if that was protected? Would that mean I can't mow down my milkweed? Would it mean if I do check for eggs and I do see that an endangered or threatened listing species is on there, that I now cannot mow that? Yet also, would it mean if there was a zero tolerance on a take that I couldn't take it or relocate it either? And I do like
Right.
that the proposal just kind of doesn't cause any of that to be a problem. It just has pretty much said, we expect you'll be able to do what you want to with your own milkweed. And if you're into helping this cause, then you'll do so ethically with it. And I appreciate that freedom to still have, of course.
I
I would agree with
complete
that.
Yeah, me three. I agree with that as well. And Emily and I are the kind of folks who are constantly talking about the importance of milkweed, planting milkweed in your yard, and then not covering with pesticides, right? So you don't hurt the monarchs that come to it. A lot of what I do is encouraging pollinator gardens, encouraging native plants in yards. But I also completely agree with you that I'm glad that this proposal does not put any type of regulations on what people are doing with milkweed in their yard because, as you pointed out, it would just cause confusion. It could cause backlash, against the proposal. But also, Emily, as you pointed out in our last episode, milkweed is a plant that is native in the United States and grows readily. Emily, as you put it, it grows in
Hmm.
ditches, it grows everywhere. And so it just seems like it would be a step too far. And so protecting the large critical habitats of the monarchs seems more important. So I agree with both of you that I'm glad that that is the direction that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has taken in this proposal, and I'm supportive of it as well.
So obviously, you are an advocate for the educational benefits of rearing monarchs. Do the rules in the proposal and where we are now change anything about your position on this? Like, do you think you will carry on as you normally do in the coming summers, or do you think you'll change up anything at all with your home rearing practice?
I suppose the first way to approach it is to again go back to just recognizing I'm seeing what it looks like on paper. Here's what it is in theory. Here's the schematic for what's been engineered. I haven't seen that engineered toy car go down the ramp yet, though, to see, is it really going to fly true? Is it going to fall off the ramp? How's this really going to roll out? But I'm encouraged by the idea that it does seem to not really be stepping in the way of anything that I've been advocating for. And that's certainly a personal bias. Of course, I'm going to be like, yay, it doesn't seem like I am doing anything illegal. Cool. And so I like that very much. I think, though, that certainly there's ripe ground for misinformation and not disinformation necessarily, just misinformation. You hear something that's not true, but it sounded legit. You didn't have time to research it, and that's true of many things in our life. We try to be as responsible as we can, but there's a reason why we turn to news outlets and to science reports, so that way we don't have to read these papers all the time. So I know that I'm going to probably have to find, once the dust has settled on this, where I would want to voice up some things, where I would choose to say, here's something that I can digest for you. And it would have to be something I feel responsible enough to be able to do. There's certainly some places where people have requested and wanted me to make certain videos, and it's like, hey, I'd love to. I don't know enough to make that video. And it's not that I'm opposed to learning new things, but maybe there are certain things that are better left for those who have a full doctorate in that study to come to terms with. And I might not be able to figure out that problem. But I know that where I've tried to have a strong suit as best I can is to try to communicate the parts that are confusing. So digesting, once it comes to fruition, what is this, new law? If it occurs the way we think it's going to, what is it really like?
Right. And I remember when that whole 2019 Atlantic article came out. I don't know if this happened to you. I know you got questions about it. We'll get to that in a second, but I know my inbox was filled with people very, very concerned about what I was doing in rearing based on the scientific study done by the University of Chicago, where the headline was reading that monarchs reared in captivity lack a crucial ability to migrate. But then you answered that question and you broke down that paper on your video to help people better understand it. And you did speak to those scientists, didn't you?
I did, yes. A lot of times on those papers, it's still always a community of willing to ask questions, communicate your work. And the majority of scientists out there, they're excited about their work. You find somebody who wants to know more about it, and you're approaching them with respect, and they understand that it's not to try to get some digging, aha, gotcha kind of moment, but you just say, I'm trying to understand, part of your life's work that you just devoted, months, blood, sweat, and tears into. They will love to talk to you about it and let you know. And as I've always tried to make it clear too, I'm not making any videos to try to give, here's my opinion of what you must do, but instead to try to help get out the message of what would you want, the populace to know? What is something that's important from this? And here's how I've interpreted it. Am I getting this correct or not? And certainly when that study came out, it was like a little bombshell of, throughout the community of monarch enthusiasts, did we get some things wrong? And we live in a society these days, and it's always been true. We want you to we want you to read our headlines. It's always been true of media, but now we got to get you to click on it. And a lot of that commotion came from just the misuse, and sometimes just out of lack of knowledge of it, the misuse of the terms of rearing versus raising to keep as pets, raising for commercial reasons, versus I've captively reared something from the wild that I've released back to the wild, and the differences between that. And the idea too that it wasn't as well focused, that hey, if you're rearing them not just in captivity, but a captivity that you have outdoors, that they can still retain that migratory cue. And the papers spoke on that very well, but the news articles did not, because we're more likely to click on something if we're alarmed. We're more likely to want to pay attention if an emergency sensor is going off. And that will give us that need of, there's an emergency going on, and reading and clicking on this is going to help me prevent that emergency. And so it's something to also try to have to walk a a responsible road with and trying to see what really is out there and boil it down to what do we need to know. And I can speak on, the best of my ability, how much I might be able to interpret the science. I know with this coming up, I am not a lawyer. And so it's not going to ever be legal advice beyond always check your local laws and state government laws and federal laws. But that said, here's what, we're understanding. Here's what's been communicated back. Here's what I can understand from.
Right. So I think this has been a question that LaDawna and I have kind of discussed a couple times, but do you have any concern about this law coming into fruition under the current administration? Obviously, the proposal was released while Biden was still president in the lame duck period. But with now that Trump is in office, do you have any concerns about this law and what might happen with it? Or even just any speculation now that we're under a different government now?
Well, I think going back to you got what's in theory compared to what's in practice. And a law is really only as good as it is enforced. You can have laws in the books that currently aren't enforced, and they're old laws, and they no longer are enforced. You've had sometimes times in government history where a law gets passed and it never gets enforced, even though it was freshly passed. So the question of how much this is going to impact us, those who are monarch enthusiasts, those who really will be affected by this and hope to see good benefit from it, it's only going to be there depending upon what level of enforcement it has. With that in mind, I don't know that I've seen any major evidence that this would be a priority for the current administration. So I think it's very good that a lot of, I think, the benefits that we can see from it come with very little work or effort needing to be done to enforce much. Besides what we really fleshed out there about the idea of commercial use, I think that maybe some more thought and language should be there in the proposal. But with that in mind, it's hopefully going to be something that can still just be very much community driven. And the benefit that if it does pass, that there's recognition that, okay, this is, a population, this is a species that we care about, and it has this status now. I think that'll open more eyes to it, to more people being inviting and being aware. And if you wanted to buy some monarch earrings off of eBay before, an argument could always be, well, they're not endangered, they're not threatened. And that changing will certainly get some others to wake up to it. So a lot of that can happen without the administration doing anything. So I do hope for, that to just steer true. But I think that also there could be problems with how well and effective it does roll out if things aren't done in a well-organized manner. And so if not much priority is being given to it, including organizing things correctly, it's fertile ground for more confusion, misinformation, and possibly even disinformation.
That's a good point. Emily has pointed out also that because the monarchs are so beloved, such a popular insect across the political spectrum, that maybe that gives us a little bit of running room here for this regulatory process at least to fully play out.
I think too, ultimately this could land on the Secretary of the Interior's desk, who we know now is Doug Burgum. And he could decide not to make this law. It's ultimately his final say. But if this were to land on his desk I don't see him saying no to such a popular insect. I would worry more about staffing and, like Rich mentioned, how is this going to be effectively rolled out organizationally?
That's a good point. So you're thinking that the Interior Secretary may okay whatever the final recommendation is that comes out from this regulatory process, but then there's nothing put behind it to really enforce it or communicate well about it.
Yeah, I don't see good communication coming out of it, but at the same time, it would be law. So I would be concerned though, because they only have until, well, I guess they have a full year, but that'll go quickly. They have until December to finalize the law. what I really hope doesn't happen is that, they got the Department of the Interior and the Fish and Wildlife Service, and there's not enough people to get this proposal done to make it to law. I don't see any of that happening yet, but I would worry about it, falling by the wayside should that department get, reduced. But I don't see, if by some, I don't see this affecting, big oil in any way necessarily, because milkweed is everywhere. They are going to propose the critical habitat of the Californian overwintering areas. It's about 5,000 acres. But otherwise, milkweed's pretty widespread. But if this were to land on Doug Burgum's desk and he were to say, like, no, you would get public outcry from this. They're very popular. We saw that in Trump's first term when he was allowing certain hunting to happen, especially with like trophies and such like that overseas. And he did back down with that. So like it would be a very unpopular thing for Mr. Burgum to do if he were to say no. So I don't see that. I don't see that being something. Could I be wrong? Yeah. But I guess we can only speculate until it happens, of course.
Yeah. I think that's a good analysis. That sounds right to me. And just so the folks listening understand, when we're using the word law here sort of a little bit colloquially, because the Endangered Species Act is a law, and then certain agencies within the US government then can write rules and regulations that have to do with that law. And so this current proposal is a regulatory proposal. Just so folks understand, when we're using the word law, it is part of the Endangered Species Act, which is a law, but folks don't need to contact their senators or their representatives about this.
Right.
The best way that people can participate in this is through this public comment period. And assuming that the government runs a little bit like it always has over this next year, the way the process works is that the agencies that propose rules like this do have to read every comment, categorize them, group them together, and report back to us as a public about what was said as a part of the public comment period. So every comment that's made generally in support of this proposal is helpful.
And to try to maybe put it into the context and looking at how an administration, how a rollout could go well or could go awry. I think that a really important part of the communication, if the listing does happen, is to make it clear as best we, being any voice out there advocating for the monarchs, to make it clear that if you're rearing monarchs, that's something that, yes, certainly you're helping out that individual. I rescued multiple eggs that were nearby some ant hills where they were going to get gobbled for sure, or at least the chance was very high. That's definitely something awesome for the individual, and it's a great way to catalyze the connection with the animal and why you want to care, why you want to plant milkweed. But it's not a conservation effort. It's something that helps the individual. But even if we all raise, 100 monarchs a summer, it's all not going to help anything unless there's more milkweed for them to come back to. The conservation effort truly is in the planting of the milkweed. So imagine a scenario, and I don't like to always speculate on like, here's what a politician could do. They haven't done it yet,
Sure.
So there's no guarantee this could happen. But I think with track record in mind of the previous time this man was at the helm, this is definitely within a plausible situation. Imagine a case where, because this comes out, because it's something that's popular for many on both sides of the aisle, as far as we can care about this iconic American animal, that we have a president who chooses to want to make this something popular for himself. And perhaps, and I'm just, benefit of the doubt, this could happen to anyone. Anyone could make this mistake and says, we need to help the monarch. You gotta rear a good population, 250 per household. Let's go. Kind of like a chicken in every pot. But instead, the administration gets behind this one and says something like that, which would maybe not be a great thing. If a whole bunch of people decide to dive into 250, there could be all sorts of outbreaks and things that just happen with lack of education. And again, I don't want to speculate, but I've also
Right.
witnessed this man during a pandemic throw out
Right,
there
right.
just, spaghetti, seeing if it hits the wall or not. Maybe we could just inject ourselves with bleach to cure this. And
Well,
so I
and
think trying to just rally behind a 250 number he doesn't understand is a possibility, plausible scenario.
oh my gosh.
I
And
didn't even think of that.
he just released all that water in California. I
Oh,
don't know if you've seen this when we're
I saw the
recording
headline.
this. Yeah, when we're recording this, Trump told the Army Corps of Engineers to release water from a lot of reservoirs in I think it's the San Joaquin Valley up where there's farming in order to help the LA wildfires. That water, they have no plan, no way of getting that water to LA for the wildfires. All that water is just released. Trump, if you guys wanted me to cut this out later, I can edit this out. You can tell me later. Uh,
I'm sure it's fine.
Trump
You
has
guys are the artists.
all
It's up
Trump, Trump, all this water gets released, and Trump posted a picture of the water, on X or somewhere, and talks about all the glorious water that he's protecting California by releasing the water. And what folks are saying is all that water is not getting captured. Some of it's going to end up right back in the ocean, and those farmers need that water this summer. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Logistics
it's
are always very
another
important.
example of him doing something that's a bonkers idea just to try and be a hero for the day, even if it's not a good idea. So maybe we shouldn't give him any ideas on the Monarchs. Keep
Hope
it
he
Well, and
on
doesn't
the
listen to this
keep
episode.
it on the Q keep it on the QT. Support the listing, support the proposal by the Fish and Wildlife Service, but keep it on
Don't
the
listen to him.
QT.
well, and let's say too, let's go to the scenario of maybe somebody's listening to this and, anything that was just said of our own personal political opinions raise some hairs on somebody. I would want to always remember, why we tune into this radio, why are we caring about the Monarchs is because we probably on this issue have way more in common than we do differences on it. We
Yes.
all want to help the Monarch. We might have maybe some differences on what's the best way or most ethical way to do that, but let's always try to find that common ground because it is there. It's there if we look for it. We just have to put in that effort to do so. And I know, like, what I always envisioned politics to be like growing up as a kid, and what I tried to enjoy in our household was the idea of no matter which political choice you made, how you chose to vote, if you were choosing to vote, whatever that freedom that you chose to exercise, how you chose to exercise it, when it was all said and done, we were done being on a side and we were all just on the side of, okay, now this person's at the job. Let's watch them closely and let's always be very critical of any wrong move that they do. Because whether you voted for them
Absolutely.
or not, they answer to us. We are the people, we are the ones who are in charge of a democracy. And so no matter who got hired, whether it was your pick or not, they are definitely somebody who should be subject to our critical opinion of it. And it's important to voice that. And here, even in the small, seemingly microcosm world of how can a monarch butterfly be best protected, here is the government saying, public comment, we'd like your help in figuring this out. Who better
Right.
than those who are interested in it?
Right.
And I don't know, I doubt this has any place, so this will probably get edited out. But like it's from a Michigan standpoint, and maybe some of this too, if Emily, you're in Wisconsin, uh, what I've seen plenty of is just it seems like the rest of the nation doesn't understand. Hey, there's plenty of us in the Midwest where like we whether you're conservative or liberal or where you are and any of that, we all have firearms because we hunt or like we have these natural resources. I can't say we all do, but like both sides of the party often in Michigan are looking at like why are we talking about these firearm laws in the same context as the rest of the nation when we know we want to protect firearm laws often, but then also we want to definitely be protective of our natural resources. The hunters, they want the firearms protected, but they want the natural resources of the deer and the woods to also be protected.
Hmm.
There can be some really like
Right.
unique things I think sometimes with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It just like from
Absolutely.
state to state, there must be also other differences there compared to how the overall nation puts it into context with media, where maybe it is quite different in South Carolina versus Kentucky versus Washington in ways that I wouldn't really know not being there. But I know how Michigan, I don't think really fits into that same overall cosm that the media portrays often,
I mean, look at milkweed. There's
right?
different milkweed all over the place. Like my milkweed's different from the milkweed in Texas to the milkweed in California. Like it's it's good that they're doing this so they can really get a good picture of what that looks like across the country with this law.
I'm jealous of some of the milkweeds that are that native ranges are. I'm in Maryland, by the way, just outside Washington, D.C., and we have a lot of really nice native milkweed here, but there's some milkweed that's native only in the western part of the United States, and I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah. Or like the green antelope horn that grows in the south. I've
Yes,
always thought that was really cool looking.
it is. Yeah.
And beauty is brought up there, and I find beauty in all these different species. But then from me, it was always from the perspective of functionality for the needs. So I was just so happy, like, all right, cool. Common milkweed is here in Michigan. That's got the biggest leaf. Here we go. And a lot of times there have been like gardening advice where people have asked if I could make some videos that don't involve common milkweed, but instead involve some of these species on the western side. And that's where I've always had to, let people know, like, I would feel very pretentious to ever make a video on a species that I myself have never actually maybe even seen, firsthand.
Right,
But I
right.
digress.
Yeah. I have a social media account. TikTok is where I have most folks know me from TikTok. I'm Donna Likes Plants, and I show a lot of native plants in my yard. But I can only show, I'm growing plants that are native where I am. And similar feelings because sometimes people will ask, well, what can I grow? Can you help me grow X, Y, or Z where I am? So what I have done is shown photographs of those plants and said, here are some that you can consider growing where you are. But in my yard, I'm growing what's native where I am. A lot of plants, a lot of our plants in the United States do have a large native range, but most of them don't. Most of them aren't native all over the country.
And with knowledge of the idea of invasive species, as a science teacher too, where there's been times where, in fact, invasive species was a science Olympiad event. I've had to become accustomed to knowledge of it enough to teach and coach that event, and seeing the overlap of how in the videos I was making, how would I address the idea of should we plant native milkweed only, or should can non-native be something in our gardens? And sometimes people have wanted me to weigh in there. And I don't think I'd be the right person to weigh in because first off, in my own yard, regardless of what house I've been at, I'm only planting native milkweed just to try to avoid any potential chance of disrupting my ecosystem with an invasive species or even just an introduced species that maybe shouldn't be there. But that's a decision I wouldn't want to say everybody should do what I'm saying because it is your yard. It's up to you. And then also in my own household, while I'm following that rule, my wife is going to and she should plant whatever she wants to. She has the freedom to do that. So if anybody's ever seen in the background of the videos, like if there was something growing in the yard, if it was milkweed, that was me. If it was not milkweed, it was either the previous owner of the home or that was my wife's work. And she can do as she pleases. And you can, if she ever gets a YouTube channel, you can tell her that comment. But so I knew I wouldn't want to speak on that to say like what you should do. And again, I don't even think that I'm the one to tell you what you should plant in your yard. I think that'd be pretentious of me too.
Right, right.
But with that in mind, that might also be starting to tip over to where some species of milkweed, particularly tropical milkweed, might actually be having a confusing effect on the monarch
Yes.
butterfly's migratory paths. And the thing to know really about that is we still don't fully know, or we're not sure if that's 100% true or to what effect it has. It's a very interesting thing that we're really trying to figure out. So in the meantime, if we don't know that, maybe we should definitely proceed with caution. And I know I just said maybe, we should definitely, but like, how else can you weigh in on that to where if you start to try to get, even new people into this idea, hey, we want you to help the monarchs, but also you're showing them, we also think you're doing this, and this wrong right now, and you're hurting it. That's not going to be very attractive of something for somebody to get their hands into. Instead, it might take with first, hey, let's see if you can, rear a monarch or two. Let's see if you're interested in planting some milkweed, and then address with the idea of here's why I don't plant non-native milkweed, and
Mhm.
here's what brought me to that decision. And try to communicate that so that way somebody can see how you got there to that decision, and has a chance to come there as well organically on their own. We're always much more likely to do something we recognize as being a good idea rather than being told you did something wrong and here's what you're supposed to do. That's a blow to the ego.
That's something we talk about a lot on this podcast with native plants is how do we, and we're going to be talking about this on an upcoming episode of like, how do we talk to our neighbors and encourage them to do the right thing? I think that messaging is very important. Well, oh, maybe try this first, and then you can consider these other things, but never come at them being like, you have to do this and this and this. Communication is so important when we want people on our side to care for the monarchs, care for the pollinators, and care for our environment ultimately.
And I'm a little different. I think I'm a little further on the spectrum, if you will. It sounds like than the two of you. In part, I think because the folks who I want to speak with are people who already want to do the right thing. I know there is a place for persuasion, bringing more people into that. And I do try and show people how beautiful a native plant garden can be and how wonderful it is to see bees and butterflies in your yard. But, but I will also say, don't plant tropical milkweed. And I will say, if you're going to put pesticides in your yard, don't grow milkweed. I do think it helps, though, also to be clear about best practices. I think I do that with love, and I try and do that with kindness, but but I'll say it.
I mean, I
And I
tell
think that,
people not to buy it personally just because if they're looking at it from even just a purely aesthetic standpoint, just get butterfly weed because it's orange and it looks like it. So you can just avoid it altogether.
and I think of, with, I myself, I don't use any chemicals, any types of pesticides in my yard, but I try to also think of like my grandmother, and if it was back younger days, grandmother's passed for some years, but I go back to, the thoughts of her and her garden. And she was, using pesticides for her own crops. Um, to think back to like how inviting would it be if that's what she was also being told at the same time. And I think that it's something to always be informed about very much, because the chance of a chemical and what it can do in your ecosystem, it can always be a wild card with how it's going to work
Hmm.
specifically in your yard. So it takes a lot of responsible decision making as far as using it. And I think that there are responsible pesticides, insecticides that are made in more ethical ways. Even if an ethical chemical is made, that doesn't mean the chemical process that makes it in the factories is necessarily environmentally safe. So like there's so many details to it, it can be really tough to weed through. And I picture my poor grandmother just wanting to help some monarchs plant some milkweed, but still grow
Mm,
her tomatoes for her, church sessions. And like, what could
yeah,
you do in that situation to know, are you doing the good thing or the bad thing? And so I'll
yeah,
always want to try to avoid like, is it good or is it bad? Those are subjective terms. But instead, as I try to tell my students, like, I'm never going to tell you how to vote, other than I think you should vote informed. I'm not going to tell you anybody ever, like, here's what I think you need to plant in your yard. But I do think before you make those decisions, please get out
yeah.
there and be informed. And while I wouldn't, for example, trust artificial intelligence to plan out, my next 10-year life plan, I might be able to trust it to give me some information a little bit quicker as far as, what are the effects of this or that plant in my yard, in my specific location before I go to do that. There could be some
Yeah.
advantages of this information is out there and very attainable at our current modern times.
I love that. And I also do food gardening and talk to people about food gardening and I think, when folks are growing food crops, they're sometimes is a need for potentially some organic pesticides there. But I also think it's really heartbreaking if someone is planting, say, milkweed specifically to help monarchs. And then if they do plant it right next to a food garden where they're using pesticides, and so they would be inadvertently harming the monarchs, I think that people would want to know that. So,
Yeah, I
uh,
think so
so,
too.
so I guess, it depends on kind of what group of people you're talking to or an individual. Like certainly if you're talking to an individual, there's an individual conversation. So yeah, I think I will ask people sometimes, what is the goal that you have in your yard? Is your goal to grow food? Is your goal to help pollinators? Is your goal just to have a yard that's beautiful, to have parties? Is it some combination of two or three of these things? And then for folks to, as you said, to be informed, to be aware, so they can make the right decisions. But I would, just me personally, I would never shy away from telling someone, if you plant milkweed and then you cover it with pesticides, you're doing more harm than good. Because I want it, again, it's heartbreaking for me if someone wants to do the right thing and they're missing that information. But I will
And
try but I appreciate what you're saying as well. And
well, I
I
think
guess,
like we're on the same page there because I fully would agree because what you just said, I would want to inform them of this. If you plant milkweed or if you use pesticides and you're planting milkweed, here's the consequences. I would agree. That information needs to be out there because if that's your opinion, then it's clear to see like you have that well thought out. It's an informed opinion. You've got your claim, your evidence, and your reasoning. So that way, when we encounter times where monarch enthusiasts and hobbyists might be trying to help the monarchs, if they have come to different conclusions, but it's still well thought out, you did it based upon information, we can at least have that discussion and find out, so what was your line of reasoning why you made that choice? And there can be sometimes logical reasons that maybe I haven't even foreseen why somebody would make that different choice, but it might make sense for their household because there are all these differences that we have that we don't always recognize or notice. But
yeah,
without having it be well thought out, if it's just, well, I did this because a website said to, or a politician told me to, and that's who I go with, and that's just it. If there's not like some knowledge as to how it's specific to you and why your reasoning, why you looked at these ideas and came to a different conclusion, there's no real conversation we can have. It's not possible to examine our line of thought and learn from each other and learn why and understand each other and what the differences are. So I fully agree with you. Getting out that important message because there are always ones out there. I don't see many would be making that decision of, yeah, I'm going to plant the milkweed by where the pesticides, going to be used if they knew it, but because no one's out there to really try to cause any nefarious things to the monarch. They only
right,
just want to help.
right. And I think sometimes when we hear different messaging, like sometimes, I think we may hear someone say, don't do this or do that. I think sometimes people are talking to different audiences, right? Because there are some people who don't know anything about native plants or monarchs or that type of thing, but they're starting to learn about it. They maybe, you know, are starting to get into it. And then there are folks who know nothing about it, right? And so
Hmm.
maybe there's an element of persuasion and inspiring them. There's all of this private land in people's yards across the country. And if we can persuade more people to do what is good for the monarchs and for biodiversity, that's great. But sometimes somebody might be talking to people who they're trying to persuade them to bring them in to this community and say, hey, come in. Let's talk about monarchs. Let's talk about what you can do in your yard. And so that may take more of a gentle approach, an approach of
Yeah.
inspiration and be welcoming. But then sometimes we need to talk to the people who are like us, right? We can have a conversation among ourselves, people who are already in the community and want to do the right thing. And I think maybe that's when, maybe that's when sometimes I feel like we can just say, oh,
Your playable character went
I'm
from
less,
novice to adept.
yeah, I'm less worried about
Yes.
someone's ego, I guess, if they're already in the community and want to do the right thing. But
Right. And I think
I love this conversation that we're having because
it's a good one.
yeah, and it's important for us to be aware of kind of who we're speaking with at any time. And of course, if
And
you're
I
just
think
talking to one person, then you can customize a conversation to where that one person's at. But when you're on a podcast, or if you're a government agency and you're communicating out to a large group, you sort of have to, pick an audience that you're communicating with. And it may not be absolutely perfect messaging for everyone all the time.
this
And
conversation's really made me reflect on the monarch's unique ability to kind of break the ice to people and how you kind of tend to go down that pipeline of being introduced to something you want to care about and do the right thing. And then you just kind of get in deeper, and then maybe you begin to get into native plants, and then it all starts somewhere. And it just made me, so when you guys were talking, it just made me reflect on that, the idea that the monarch is the gateway insect.
I think it can be very much. And I think, when you have politicians, it can be said sometimes the problem is more important to them than the solution. You can have some things out there that are seen as strong issues. How strong they are is debatable. I think sometimes quite strong, but even so, whether they're strong or weak, they can be a litmus test to where it's very easy to say I'm pro this or I'm anti that. Um, I'm pro life, I'm pro choice, or I am, conservative with the environment versus I want it deregulated. But some things that are not litmus tests would be something like education. No
Mm.
one's going to say I'm anti-education. We're all pro. We all want to teach the youth of America and the next generation, but the best ways to do it, that's where there's a lot of different ideas. And the only way we can get to some cool, interesting, and well thought out decisions is by discussing those differences. And
Mm.
here with you have a place where you've removed any red or blue or in betweens from it to just look at, hey, here's a real problem. We all like the monarch butterfly and it's going down. The plane's crashing. What are we going to do to get this out of there? Because it's totally something we can do. And it's our chance to look at something where, okay, we don't have these easy little litmus tests of deciding for red or blue. We actually have to solve this problem if we want to. How can we come together to do it? And only by discussing all the differences we have, recognizing our differences in thoughts and opinions, and how this is best solved with backing from well intelligent, thought out, evidentiary experiments, can we really steer the ship in a way that's going to be something we can look back on and be proud of? Be proud of coming together as a nation and perhaps inspire other work like this.
Mm. Beautifully put.
I loved it.
Oh, well, thank you.
Are
That
you a
was
teacher?
perfect.
You should go into teaching.
Yeah.
Part of the retirement plan, retire from teaching so I can find another way to teach.
So you recently left a suburban environment for an urban one, and you've shared the differences on your YouTube channel in the past. Can you talk a little bit about what folks can do in an urban environment that helps the monarchs, or any advice you might have? Because I think we talk a lot about yards in suburban areas just naturally, because I think that's where a lot of us exist. But really, conservation can happen anywhere. And I think you have that perspective. So if you have anything to share, would you be willing to do so?
Oh, certainly, certainly. And I found myself in the situation too, where like, I was maybe living, the house I was at was kind of a suburban area in the sense of it was just on the edge of where the suburban maybe ended and more of like some woods started.
Okay.
And then I also taught some miles north of that where it was very much like farm community. And so that was an urban, or I'm sorry, a rural environment. And so in like making the move now in Metro Detroit, it's a different environment I'm living in compared to suburban, and it's Metro Detroit schools versus, not that it's a public school, but that Metro Detroit area, more of our urban school setting than a rural school setting. So a lot of like differences happening there. And then just from making that move, I get to my new yard and there's no there is one stalk of milkweed. There was one wild milkweed stalk that was there. But beyond that, like I had to start over. And so
Hmm.
I am actually like loading up some of my old videos, just like, well, what did I do again? How many weeks did it take for that to sprout? And having to like, figure out what patch of my yard am I going to start my milkweed crop. But in looking at that too, the house that we have has a much larger yard, and I'm not saying it is a large yard, but a much larger yard than other houses on the same street. And it gives me that clear view perspective of, hey, anybody who ever stumbled upon a video there or just even wanted to help the monarch, they might have a more difficult situation when they don't have an option of planting milkweed somewhere. Maybe instead, what little space you do have, you are using it for your own gardening, your own community garden. Maybe you are going to use pesticides because that's just how you're making some ends meet. And that is a reality that I see in my neighborhoods. So what can that person do if they still want to be involved with this? And from just the idea of, you could have potted milkweed plants, you could get involved with instead of your own yard, but what can you do in community parks? Can you do at, these public areas that are really owned by the public? And if they have voluntary custodians willing to do the upkeep, you're probably not going to have to twist too many arms to get somebody to say, yeah, we'll let you make something beautiful that you maintain for free. There's a lot of things that we can do if we wish, but people have to see those options. And then they also have to maybe understand we as the enthusiasts, the hobbyists, we're trying to give you just many options. So that way, if you want to be involved, you can find your slice. It doesn't mean you have to have everything that's on this buffet table. You don't have to be involved with the rearing and the seed collection and the planting and all of it. Maybe just you find your slice of, hey, I was able to make this cool community garden have some milkweed in there now. That's a win for the monarch. You're already a hero to the monarch butterfly in getting to make that step. And if we can all find just one slice, we don't need to take on the whole pie. We can just instead do this together as a team effort.
And that's something I really liked about the proposal, was how much they pushed for community and public efforts with this. Because I was concerned if it had been stricter, what could organizations do? What could individuals do? Because we were already doing amazing work. So I'm really, that was probably my favorite part about the proposal, was how it does allow for that still.
There are also native plant societies in most states and organizations that do work like go out into public areas and remove invasive species. So, even apart from if someone doesn't have the time or ability to do something or they don't have a yard or the time or ability to go and tend a garden in a public place, sometimes, you can sign up for like a weekend or two, right? To go out with a group of people and pull up some invasive species, or these organizations sometimes will go out and plant milkweed. So you can sign up, find one of these organizations, start with like a native plant society in your state, or, meet some people over a weekend and do some good work.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
many
Yeah.
options.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a completist list of, well, I'm doing these two things, and somebody else who's posting on their social media these 5 things they are doing. Our lifestyles are different, and it doesn't have to be seen as a competition as much as it can be seen as, I'm doing this part that I chose. This is the part that's important to me, or the part that's within my means I choose to do. And if life changes, and maybe you have to take a year off from it, you don't have to feel that guilt of, I was committed to having to do this every single year. That can be certainly a motivating factor that I love having. But the best ways to always help the monarch is to recognize there's so many different ways you can do it, that sometimes not doing it one way can give you room to do it in other ways too. Some years I might want to focus on where I'm getting milkweed in my yard. Definitely after moving, that's been a major focus. In other cases, I might want to focus on what am I doing for community outreach, or how can I get some messages out there that are better, or even what are some new creative ways that others have maybe thought about, since so many are thinking about this now, but I haven't learned about because I just haven't put that time into the research yet. All of these things can be something. It can be a year of learning. It can be multiple years of just trying to research, what am I going to do when I do, decide, or if I do end up having a yard one day. Many different things that we can do.
Love it.
Absolutely. So is there anything else that you wish, in terms of words of wisdom, you can share, or advice that you want to give to our audience when it comes to monarchs, conservation, or otherwise?
Oh, I like the way that was worded because it opens the door. It's not restrictive. Words of wisdom. I think some of the best I have ever heard. Yeah, and it's a quote that may be lost in the pages as to who came up with it, but think for yourself and question authority. I think that that's an operating standpoint that science always has, and it's good no matter which arena you're talking about. Question for evidence, the question for political decisions. We need to come to our own decisions, and if there is an authority, in science, I would say it's the evidence. You can be an expert, but even experts can be wrong. It's often important to listen to them. They have some pretty good ideas. They're experts for reasons, but it all still boils down to what is the evidence. And in science, if someone's making that claim, we want to question, show me that evidence, allow me to come to that same conclusion. In politics, we should be operating the same way, where if elected officials have been entrusted with this power that is the power of the people, we should be able to question our officials and expect them to give us what was your line of reasoning so we can come to that same conclusion and understand it. That might be the best I got.
What a wonderful ending point, too.
I agree. I agree.
I guess I would just like to end also just thanking Bees and Reverie Radio. This is a very awesome, worthy endeavor, and I'm very happy and honored to be an early part of it, and wish you much success with helping be another voice in different media and different ways to get the word out there. As a public school teacher, I would love to communicate in so many different avenues and ways, but it's limited, and my students do come first, even before the Monarchs do. So having some others
Absolutely.
out there communicating this message is very important to me too. So I appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much for being
Yeah,
here.
thank you.
And if you want to share any social media, your YouTube channel or any way that, if you're open to that for people who listen to this and want to, come and find you elsewhere, we can put that in our closing of the episode and in the show notes so people can just click and go if they're listening to this podcast on the internet.
Yeah, and I like to keep it simple. So just the only one worth sharing is the only one that really has the Monarch content on it pertinent to this conversation. So YouTube's channel is Mr. Lund Science.
Thank
Lund
you.
is Lund. And I appreciate you guys really, again, having me. And when it comes to the social media, I guess I don't know if I owe an apology these days, for many have a lot of different ways that can get reached. I know that if I had a lot of social media, that would just be a lot of unchecked inboxes. So I try to keep it just to MrLundScience on YouTube. So that way I got one
Sure.
comment section to have to look at, and it's kept some sanity for me. So
I hear you. Thank you again, Emily, for arranging that interview. We encourage people to follow Rich Lund's YouTube channel, and also please consider leaving a public comment on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service proposal before March 12th, which is their deadline for public comment. We will also post another reminder about this here on our podcast in another week or two. This is one of the best ways that as Americans we can be involved with some significant environmental decision making. Every public comment really does make a difference.
Thanks for tuning in to Bees and Reverie Radio. We are releasing full episodes every Thursday, pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts. This is season 1. We also release additional short bonus episodes as current issues come up. You can follow us on social media. Our handle is @BeesandReverieRadio, and you can reach us via email at beesandreverieradio@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and make sure you plant milkweed for the Monarchs this spring.